That's right, guess who? It's the great and glorious, soon to be famous one day, Nick Dutch, back on the camera again one more time. I'll just let you into a little secret. I've got a terrible cold and I haven't slept for ages, so I might come over just a little coarse and hoarse today, so ignore that and just think about the content just for the moment. We've got in my hands here the Major Arcana of the Merlin Tarot, and this is quite interesting and quite different to a lot of forms of tarot. If you're someone who plays around with something like tarot rather a lot, you build up your own symbolic understanding. You know, that's what you do. So essentially you're taking your life experiences, you're taking everything that you've been through, and you're placing it into various different categories, and those categories are symbolized by the various cards of the major and minor arcana, the astrological signs, and all the rest of that. It's yourself building up a story of life, reflecting on tarot itself, and trying to get some kind of feeling for what these symbols could actually mean for yourself. Sure, you do start with a basic foundation of some of the classical texts maybe, or some of the classical interpretations as to what various astrological signs mean, or various colours mean, and all the rest of that, and the same with archetypes as well. But it grows with you, you know, understanding life and understanding yourself and understanding tarot is like a growing, evolving process. The Merlin Tarot is quite unique in its major arcana because the number sequencing is totally different to anything that you may have seen before. It was designed for its own particular mythology. Now, as you can see, these cards are very new, but I've actually had them for years and years and years and years and years. I mainly read with the Crowley Thoth Tarot, or the Golden Dawn, or the Celtic Tarot when I'm going out to do fairs and events and the rest of it. I tend to use the Celtic Tarot rather a lot because it's rather culturally ambiguous and fits in quite well with British society and British culture, because a lot of people think that the Celts were the original inhabitants in Britain, when in fact, well, you'd probably say it was the ancient Britons. The Celts themselves are more likely to be a French tribe that spread worldwide, basically, but they aren't necessarily the British original inhabitants, but the Celtic imagery still resonates very strongly with British people. So we're just going to have a quick look through the Merlin Tarot and just see what we can see. The first card of the Merlin Tarot is the Moon. Now that's odd, very odd. I don't know whether you can see it on your screen there, but the imagery is very similar to the classic Moon card. You've got two fierce creatures, in this case dogs, or wolf-like creatures, and you got two things which could be the two towers that you would normally see on the standard Moon card, but one of them is actually a tree and the other one's a tower. So it's slightly different symbolism. We've got a very strong character in, you know, a face in the moon, so it's presumably a reference to a variety of lunar deity. I'm just running through these without looking at the book. I mean, I haven't actually studied the book of the Merlin Tarot for many years. I'm probably going to go back to that and go through the process. But never mind. What else we got there? We got a peculiar amphibious creature on the bottom corner, which is a bit of a departure from what one would normally expect. I mean, we would normally see like a crayfish or a crab in the pool itself, but instead we've got this reptilian creature, and it's outside of the pool at the foot of the card and not actually in the pool itself. So it is very different. I mean, it's still got some of the same impressions that you would normally get from, you know, from something which is of tarot. But there's little subtle differences that really get you, and of course the numbering sequence is different, obviously for a reason. It's connected to its own mythology. If you get yourself one of these sets, which is like a book plus a set of cards, it's rather like those fantasy storybooks you can get. Sometimes they would have just like the story in a very small part of the book, and the rest of it is all about the genealogy and the history of the lands and the rest of that. Okay, and that's a very similar way in which you approach the tarot. You've got the images in the cards, and then you've got the book, so you can try and see how the two fit together. And so there's a creative process of understanding, just like you would do with a work of fiction. And so the story of the Merlin Tarot is, of course, very different to anything else you might have experienced. Second card of the major arcana is the Sun. So we've had the Moon, now we're going straight on to the Sun. There's a pattern emerging already, okay, very pagan dominated, and the symbols there rather unique. We got a young child riding a horse. Very beautiful, very soft colours, and very softly drawn. It's not too simplistic. There's a good feeling of light and shadow there. There's some feeling of depth, and there is some beauty. And yep, the sun has got a face in it. So that's obviously another deity connection. So for those of you who are Wiccan or pagan orientated, the Merlin Tarot could be just the thing for yourself, because you've got your lunar and solar deities which are being expressed there already. Okay. The third card of Major Arcana, the Star card. Again, completely different numbering order to what we would normally expect from an ordinary pack of tarot cards. But also, we've had Moon, Sun, now we're getting the stars. It's again a very standard type of pattern, I suppose. Talking about the heavens, things which are holy, things which are superior, and above us. The star card is relatively similar to some star cards you might see in other tarot packs, because there's, you know, a naked woman surrounded by something. And she's got some more signs which are more associated with, like, the Temperance symbology, because she's got one cup in one hand which is directing upwards towards the sun, and the other cup she seems to be pouring out the moon below, or pouring out another sun. So it's a very peculiar expression of what the star card is about. The Wheel of Fortune. Now this one is very Wiccan, if you think about it. Very traditionally Wiccan in many different ways. You've got a fish symbolizing water. You've got a stag. You've got a wolf, and you've got a horse. And this looks to me like the four seasons, and it could be interpreted as the four elements. But you'd expect there to be a bird or something symbolizing air within the circle, but we don't have that. Instead, we got two dragons, top and bottom, and that's presumably an Arthurian connection. All right, if you think about it, you know, the prophecy of Merlin about was it the victory of the Pendragons over the other lot? Either way, you know, that kind of message is there. But it's still an incredibly powerful card. So far, out of these four trumps you've been through, I think the Wheel of Fortune is the most compelling so far, because it feels more powerful and more energized, and there's that sense of expectancy. Maybe that's just my associations with the mythology associated with the Battle of the Dragons within the Arthurian legend. Okay, fifth, Justice of the Major Arcana. It's a lady holding a sword in one hand, a cup in the other. She's got an owl in front of her on the scale. She's not actually holding the scales, so it's a slightly different interpretation there. And yes, we've got those two dragons appearing, which are interlaced on the tapestry behind her. You see that? The red dragon and the blue dragon. So justice and a battle between two tribes. Maybe there's a very, you know, predominant, important message there. Judgment card is totally different yet again. We've got another almost goddess type figure appearing in this female phallus shape at the top, who's got something which appears to be a staff with a whip coming out of it, which is obviously a bit, you know, kinky, and you might say. And beneath that you've got an elderly male face and a infant face as well, which is a bit of a departure from what you would normally get from the message of judgment within tarot, because the judgment card of the tarot principally deals with salvation. It's again a very important Christian symbol, which was probably connected to the original, you know, Christian stuff which came out of Rome, speaking of redemption and other people's sin. What is the message here? Well, it looks to me to be more of a question of growth and recognition of your own personal flaws, your own personal juvenile mentality. You know, I haven't read the book, but there must be some other reason why there is that strong female sign at the top there. Okay, the Fool card. This is like the 7th Major Arcana, which is a very unusual place to have the Fool. But this is still the evolution of the story of Merlin, and the evolution of the story, the way that the artist interpreted the tarot. Very traditional tarot fool imagery. We got a wild creature who's at his side, and this time it's more like a shepherd, a sheepdog. So it's not the most frightening of fierce wild creatures. And the fool, of course, has his knapsack, and there's something of an importance in it. We can't tell precisely what. And he's holding a white flower, and he has a fancy headdress. So this looks more, again, pagan and shamanic, but with some traditional tarot themes to it. But it's rather odd. It is rather odd. I don't know which particular region has a tradition of having coloured ribbons in the hair of a male during certain rites within Europe. But remember, this is a British or a European mythology, so it's rather curious. The Magician card, number 8. This is much more traditional. You got the man standing behind an altar. I suppose we can get a feeling that this is talking about, growing up. The first part of the Major Arcana is talking about growing up, and the Magician card in this particular tarot is much more to do with the Merlin character when he's a grown man and actually, more well versed in his art, more well educated, and has progressed on quite nicely. So as far as the difference between this tarot and the standard Major Arcana is it moves on to this level of maturity and starting the career at a proper level much later in the actual Major Arcana. It doesn't go straight from the Fool to the Magician. Okay, the Magician card here, 8th in the Major Arcana. It's got the disc, the wand, the sword, and the chalice. So it's referring back to the traditional tarot type imagery, and also the traditional modern pagan imagery, which has the Golden Dawn connotations and the rest of that. And also you'll notice, so I don't know whether you can notice on this lousy camera, but the disc has got rainbow colours on it, which reminds me very much of the way that the colours was used vaguely by the Golden Dawn. Okay, it's been interpreted in much more sort of more rainbowy, if you get my drift, kind of message. But there's also a wild boar underneath his table, and he's got 2 serpents entwined around the legs of the table itself. Unlike most tarots, you can see all 4 legs of the table, whereas some people would actually interpret one of the legs of the table being off the screen, so to speak, to be speaking about another dimension of life which is hidden. Okay, namely the 3 being the 3 dimensions we live in, and the 4th dimension being the spiritual. But it's again a slightly different interpretation, slightly different message. There's also cave painting type imagery in this card as well, suggesting some kind of even more ancient tradition being passed on over time. Okay, the 9th one, we got the Chariot. Very strong female character this time. Do you normally get female characters in your Chariot card? No, you don't. But this is a very strong female looking character, carrying a shield which has a face very similar to the god character in the Sun card, and is looking out for war. There's something that looks like either a kestrel or a Harris hawk floating or flying in the air there. So there's something interesting going on. This looks much more like someone going out to hunt, but going out to hunt in a battle chariot, which is weird. And going over water, there's also a pelican there as well. Why the pelican will be there, I don't know. I've got to go back to the book at some point. I'm just telling you my feelings as I'm going through the deck, okay? 10th Major Arcana, which they've decided to call Guardian. And yes, it's got that totally stark naked geezer wearing horns on his head, or antlers, and is clothed in a cloak which is covered in leaves. Very Green Man orientated. He's got a little zigzaggy symbol on the palm of his hand, which is very similar to the zigzaggy symbol that was on the knapsack that the Fool carried. So there's a sense of continuity. It's the same character. It's the same kind of story. And whatever it was he held, which was outside of him, is now being projected from his dominant hand. So he's grown in wisdom and power. Obviously a more senior character, so you do get the feeling that the progression of the Major Arcana is the story of him growing and changing and going through various different challenges as he grows up. Okay, we got a tower in the distance, a wolf and a deer, which is again very, very British. This is sticking. to the mythology of Europe, basically. The lightning struck tower, very powerful indeed, and also much more traditionally tarot. I mean, this one, the one they call Guardian, is a bit of a diversion from normality, so to speak. And having the little reptile in the moon card was again a deviation away from tradition. But the lightning struck tower in this card, which isn't actually lightning, yeah, it is lightning struck. There is a bolt of lightning coming out of the sun. It's much more of an emphasis on the fire and the smoke and the destruction, with the two characters falling to their death. And there's various other things, such as something that looks like a crown and another object that I can't quite place, which is also falling to the ground. Maybe the destruction of civilization and the ultimate challenge to the kingdom. Now we got another more theological card. It's their death card, but it's a female goddess type creature, a bit like the crone interpretation within Wicca again. But this does not look like an ancient woman. It looks like a woman who is probably menopausal or just post-menopausal age. She's carrying an apple and what looks like a little sickle that she's presumably there going to use to either bring people to their death or to provide healing herbs, maybe. And there's lots of apples around her feet, and there's a tree in the background, and you get the feeling the apples came from the tree. But there's also something which appears to be an expanse of water behind her, maybe a reference to the river Styx and the routes to the other world. Which is intriguing. Very different. I mean, it's not your skeletal figure. But, I mean, your standard tarot death image is a skeleton with a scythe. In this case, we've got a fleshy, living, humanoid figure who's carrying a sickle and carrying an apple. The Hangman, that's more of a return to tradition, apart from the fact he doesn't have the money bags under his arms, okay? Legs in the traditional T for traitor shape on the top, but also a great feeling of tranquility about it, with fish jumping out of the water, and also bows and arrows at his side. So the message there is very different. He's also not tied at his feet, so you get the feeling he's put himself in that position deliberately. You know, he just rammed his foot underneath the branch and is just hanging there. And has somehow chosen whatever it is that he's going through. But it's also a younger male character than the Guardian card we had on for the 10th major arcana. The Hermit is another return to tradition, which has some connections with the Crowley Thoth Tarot, but is slightly different. He's not carrying a lance, and he's kind of carrying something that looks like a rock with, again, the two dragon or the two serpent images upon it, but it is the rock which seems to be glowing. And he is alone, but it's not really a kind of like a dark type feeling around him, but the stone is still illuminating his path. And this is much more the sort of like Gandalf the Grey kind of imagery, the sensation of this character, whoever he is, has now moved into old age and extreme wisdom. Okay, this one's called Innocence, and it's the 10th major arcana. And it's much more of a high priestess type character, really. She's a female character enthroned on a throne, which is that same repeated motif of two intertwined serpents, one going up that way, one going that way. Okay, we got a disc of many colours underneath, very similar to what was on the Magician's Table, so they're using repeated motifs to give you some feeling of continuity with the story. And she's got a staff which looks like a staff of power in one hand. And she seems to be surrounded by something that looks like a nebula or a galaxy. So that's something which is something that we will be aware of in the modern era, but it's being portrayed in something which is to do with a more ancient understanding. So I suppose that's a bit clever, because it's also telling you that it's making it for you. It's not making it for people in an ancient time. Temperance. An angelic figure. If this was a totally pagan type tarot, why would we have an angelic figure? Alright. fact that the angel type wings look much more like the wings of a bird, like a falcon or a bird of prey. There's a volcano in the background. There's 1 foot in the water and 1 foot on the land, very similar to what you'd expect with traditional tarot, and the Temperance character is pouring liquid from one vessel to another, measuring. So it is, that's going back to tradition. I like that. Obviously you can tell that I'm much more comfortable with traditional tarot imagery rather than necessarily something which is more specific to a specific story or narrative. The Emperor. This is one that came up in one of the readings I did recently, which I'm sure you remember from the video on the Nick Dutch Tarot channel. Carrying a scepter and an orb. Again, the same motif of the bird in the background, just as we had on the Chariot card. There must be some kind of connection with the bird. In some forms of tarot symbolism, the bird relates to the spirit, the soul, the afterlife, and it's got some connection to immortality, as well as basically, looking after yourself in the forms of wisdom from the air as a mercurial reference to some people. The Strength card, a lady basically having her hand licked by a lion. Some of the traditional tarot interpretations of the Strength card is, the story of pulling the thorn out of a lion's paw, and therefore being nice to something that's nasty, and then the thing which is nasty then being nice to you back. And she's basically being given love by the big cat. Quite a nice standard message. So the Strength card can also refer to forgiveness, it can refer to love, it can refer to compassion, and also a form of changing an attitude towards someone or something that you previously hated. So starting to, instead of learning from what you hate or what you fear, but learning to see the things that you fear in a different light. Okay, now we got, it's called the Empress. It's the 19th major arcana, and it's a very, again, very pagan, very much the kind of Lady of the May or Queen of the May character. She's got a garland on her head, she's got a floral, almost Laura Ashley type dress, which is a bit middle class. So I think they know they know the demographic of the people who will be buying their tarot, obviously. And she's seated on a stone throne with a dragonfly image on it, and it's just spring and summer type imagery, really. It's like that nice time of the year after you've been through the cold and everything's going to be okay for a while kind of feeling. It's quite a comforting card. It doesn't have the drama of the lightning struck tower or the solitary chill of the death card, the way that it's expressed within the Merlin Tarot. Okay, number 20, the Lover's card. Again, a very strange position to have the Lover's card in within the regular major arcana, and it's a naked male, naked female character with something which looks a bit like Glastonbury Tour in the background, and your traditional theological character giving a blessing to these two individuals. So it feels much more to do with traditional love and marriage rather than necessarily the message of moving forward to a time of responsibility, which some forms of tarot card have. If you look at the Oswald Worth Tarot, it's sometimes referred to as the parting of the ways, in which you've got the young male character choosing a younger woman over an older woman, as if he's moving away from his mother and moving on to a new relationship with someone who he's going to be with for the rest of his life. So that's where the time of responsibility comes in. But this one is much more simple. It's to do with two characters in love or being joined by some kind of divine blessing or hand fasting, with a sense of there being some kind of religious building in the background. So it's very beautiful, but it's a departure from tradition. But it has some connection to the symbology that was in the Crowley Thoth Tarot, though, if you remember some of those images. The final one, Priestess. It's interesting that the snake imagery has been changed into wristbands that she's got on her hands or on her wrists, but she's wearing them as if she is controlling. She is controlling whatever it is, this political power struggle between two warring tribes. She is controlling the balance of good and evil. And it's rather weird. More summer or autumn in terms of its colours. Her cloak seems to be covered with imagery which it looks like it's bird imagery or feather imagery. And she's got a pure white robe underneath, so maybe purity underneath the savageness of nature. She's got a mask on the bottom there, and she's obviously taken that off, so that's revealing something different underneath her. Alright, you got flames on one side, and you got a tree on the other, so maybe that's destruction and that's rebirth. As far as tarot decks go, it's really rather different. It is something different in lots of different ways. The artist has obviously tried to connect or correlate somehow with the original tarot, what proper, as it were, tarot packs are about, and there are allusions and references to traditional tarot packs, but the quality of the imagery and the message of the imagery is totally different. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this brief, more intuitive journey through the major arcana of the Merlin Tarot. Good fortune, God bless.